Let's go, Sherry. Oh, is this being
Yes.
video? Oh,
Supposed to be.
all right. Okay, please join us in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Note for the record that all council members are present.
Okay, adoption of the agenda. Any additions, deletions, or changes? Take a motion to move adoption.
Move adoption.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, this is a budget workshop, and we have item A, which is receive presentation on the 2014-15 budget overview, and I guess this is a oral transmittal.
We'll do a little bit of an oral transmittal. I'm going to have a couple preliminary comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Stuart to kind of walk you through some of the particulars with regards to the proposed 2014-2015 budget. Before we get into that, I just want to say a couple things about the budget process itself. We have, as the council's aware, a budget subcommittee that works with staff and works through staff throughout the year in looking at budget issues, budget process, and they have reviewed what we're going to be presenting here tonight. That's a little bit different than what has happened in years past, where there was not as much council involvement early on in the budget process. So that's a little bit of a change in the last couple of years. The budget is a document that gets reviewed by the council in June and gets adopted by the end of June. And it's a policy statement that gets implemented for July 1st of each year. However, in terms of the staff's development of the budget, the process begins much earlier. It begins January, February, works its way through the spring into the document that's before you tonight. Sometimes I get comments from council members or members of the public who are operating in real time, and they know that we've discussed certain things, let's say in the March, April, or May time period, and kind of wonder where that is in the budget process. Many of those things don't make it into this document, and they're things that we'll be bringing forward in our conversation here, but it's because of the way the process works in terms of development of the budget. The other thing I want to say is that often budgets get confused as accounting documents. It's not an accounting document. It's a policy document that states what the City Council's priorities are in terms of overseeing and managing the City of Brisbane. In the back end of the budget process, at the end of the year, you will get a document that we call a CAFR, which is basically the audit and that is the kind of the back end of the budget, and this says what has happened with the funds as we worked our way through the past fiscal year. And that's done on an annual basis, but that's a very much more of an accounting document, whereas the budget is really a policy document. In terms of what's presented to you tonight, the 2014-2015 budget, I think this is a moment in time in which we're taking a significantly different road. Over the last 5 years, as you know, we went through a period of time, as most local governments did, in which we were in a restrictive mode. We reduced staffing levels. We reduced our operating budgets. We spent very little in terms of the capital needs of the city. We were not able to put away dollars other than accumulation of our general fund reserve, which Stuart will get into in more detail later on. However, during that period of time, we did make, I think, a very important and significant policy decision that was made by the City Council back in 2007, 2008, and carried through this period of time, and is really kind of instrumental in what you're going to see over the next couple of weeks in terms of the budget presentation. That was that despite the reductions and the cutbacks that we were doing, we decided that we were going to continue to provide all of the services that we had traditionally provided to the community. We were going to maintain all the programs that we had traditionally provided, and we would maintain all of the facilities that we had. Now, that was a significant policy decision because one of the outcomes of that is that we've had a significant amount of deferred maintenance over the last 5 years, and you're going to see a lot of catch-up on that in this budget, or proposed catch-up on that. Another method that we used over the last 5 years was the use of a lot of overtime in the police and fire departments. You're going to see that to be addressed in part in the police department by a recommendation for 2 new police officer positions, which will help with the overtime. As you know, that has been a real stress area in terms of the police officers and the operation of the department. And we've also had a number of job assignments that where people worked out of traditional roles, and we're kind of trying to restrain that or tighten that up a little bit in this budget. So those are, I think, kind of the main issues. This budget is really an effort to start to get back and address the capital needs of the city and to address the maintenance needs of the city. And you will also see reference, as we said as we put together in our work plan, which we discussed a couple months ago, our desire to do a thorough and comprehensive review of all of the city's unmet needs, whether they be post-employment health benefits that employees have, to our pension benefits, to the capital reserves that are needed for water and sewer utilities, for our vehicles, for our equipment replacement. Not that we're necessarily going to be able to fund all those, certainly not in the short run, but we are at least going to be able to have a comprehensive sense of what those costs are, because that's going to be very much a reflective of future decisions the council may have. It's often, I think in the past, we've looked at fund balances or general fund balance, which we've been very fortunate in Brisbane that we've had a fairly robust general fund balance over the years. But when you start to peel that away with some of the unmet or unfunded needs and liabilities of the city, it becomes a much more modest-looking number. So we'll be addressing that in the 2014-15 budget year. With that said, unless there's any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart. We're going to walk through kind of an overview of the 2014-15 budget. And the city clerk is going to be giving her budget this evening. Next Monday and next Wednesday, we will go through the rest of the budgets of the various city departments and functions. And then on June, is it 19th, I think? 19th. Yeah, the Thursday, June 19th, we'll have the final budget being prepared to present to you for adoption. That budget goes into effect on fiscal year 2014-15, which is July 1st. And as you know, we also come back in the mid-year We revise the budget as necessary. We update the forecasts on the revenues, and we take a look at the budget during the middle of the year. So it's a very much of a dynamic process. A lot of people, I think, sometimes think of budgets as you adopt it, you put it away on a shelf, and that's the end of what you see it. The departments and the staff use it throughout the year to guide us in terms of the expenditure sides of the city. The finance director and the finance department obviously keep a very close look on the revenue part of it, and we try to come back to you in the mid-year and kind of see where we're at. With that said, unless there's any questions.
Any council questions, Ray?
I wanted to make one observation. Cliff and I are the budget subcommittee, and we have met regularly with staff, and they've been very helpful and very responsive, and some of the things you'll see are a consequence of the dynamic of our interaction, and their commitment on the part of staff is quite significant, to the point where we actually had our last meeting on the Memorial Day holiday, and both the city manager and the finance director were there, and of course we were there too. And so we've really tried an effort to have the council involved in this process, throughout the year. And anyway, I think it's been working pretty well, and I look forward to the continuation of the presentation.
Any other questions?
No.
I have one, Clay, this was given to us, anatomy of priority-based budget process, and I'm assuming that this kind of is part of the process of what we've been doing, but we're, reading through it, we're definitely not there, so.
Yeah, okay, I was going to talk about this later on in the process, but I can briefly speak to this.
Okay.
This document, which I handed out to all of you, I think a few days ago, is a document that is called Priority-Based Budgeting. It's put together by the Government Finance Officers Association, and it's supported by a nonprofit called the Center for Priority Budgeting. They're based out of Denver, Colorado. Last year, when I was at the ICMA conference, I spent some time with those folks, talked a little bit about the services that they provide, and then also got this a handout to provide to you. We've had some discussions about this in the subcommittee. I think we're not at the point where the subcommittee is necessarily ready to recommend a particular approach or not. But what I think is interesting in this document is that there is, I think, 6 cities that are kind of organizations that were highlighted here, and they all took slightly different approaches. So it was really customized to their circumstances and their situation. When we first got into this kind of conversation around priority-based budgeting, which on one level I think you always do priority-based budgeting, right? But we got into a more thorough kind of conversation about it a few years ago when we were at that unique and almost terrifying moment in time when we knew we were going to lose VWR, and we weren't quite sure whether we were going to get the recycling business license in place, and we were looking at significant cuts in the budget on top of what we had already done. And at that time, I think we felt that we really needed to kind of take a different look at the budget, because we knew we were not going to be able to preserve all the programs and services that we had done up to that point with that sort of budget reduction. Now, the pressure of that has kind of been taken off, but I think we've had some very interesting and, I guess, lively conversations at the subcommittee level, and I'm sure we'll get into that at some later point. My suggestion is that we agendize this for a conversation at some point, either in this process or sometime relatively soon, and kind of discuss it. I think that was the decision of the subcommittee to do that, and kind of go from there.
Okay. All right, very good. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Clay.
All right, all Stuart.
Time of year I wait all year for. This is so exciting for me. I know, I'm a little bit strange. So, council members.
I guess we all are. It's exciting to Ray and to myself too, and I'm sure Cliff and Terry and Lori, this is your first go-round, so you'll find the excitement in this also.
Yes, this is opening comments from city manager. They were done. So going on into the budget and some of the changes that we're doing and kind of a big overview of the budget. So as Clay said, we're proposing some organizational changes. There are some issues that we have found that we need to start adding staff back. Work is picking up in the planning department. Clay talked about the 2 police officers where we're having overtime. We have a need for front office assistants on a half-time basis. We had this in the past, and then we cut it back, and now it's time that we pick it back up to deal with agendas, to deal with records management, to deal with some of the reception issues. Half-time planning support, half-time person addition in planning. So right now we have Angel on half-time in planning. We would bring her on full-time. John will go more into that. We have a senior planner, so when Tim left, we had filled his time on a part-time basis. Right now we're looking at, as the building picks up, as we're going through the general plan, as we're going through the draft DIR, you start naming the types of topics that we've got. We've got the code, form-based codes. We've got Sierra Point that we're working through. So there's a lot of issues going on in planning that they need another person there. An engineering assistant, and I think I've got the right title. It's an engineering assistant, engineering tech. Randy could tell you better which level it is, but we've budgeted in it an engineering assistant pay, and that's to help with the capital projects. As you go through the budget, you'll notice there's a lot of capital that we're doing. We're looking at the $5 million in the water and sewer funds. So if we start having to have, right now in the past we've had, with less capital projects, the senior engineers have been doing some more of that lower level work to save money. Now, as their capital projects are picking up, there's a need to fill in. Following up from the previous year, on the program-based budget, we've implemented it in Parks and Recreation. So as you go through your budget and you look at Parks and Recreation, you'll see the programs are split out with costs, revenues, and participants. The costs, and we've spent a lot of time on this at the subcommittee, the costs are the direct costs of the program. So they're not, Russ's time allocated to a program. It's if you were to close down one of our programs, that's what we would save by shutting that program down. And that's what we put the direct, so it's direct costs and the revenue that we take in. So for instance, we don't put in, not only do we not put Russ's time in, we don't put Nancy's time in that it takes to have people sign up for the programs. And the reason for that is if you were to close one single program down, it's not going to affect the overall workload of these people. So it's really unfair to say that, 1% of Russ or 0.5% of Russ is here, because if what happens if you said, okay, let's reduce that program, we're not going to reduce that 0.5% of Russ or of Nancy. So we have just the direct costs of the programs. We have the city capital improvement plan. What?
Tricia, Nancy retired Friday.
Yes, Nancy did retire. Will always be Nancy. You're right. It's Tricia now. I apologize. That's what I get for not being here enough. Yes, Nancy retired. We had a big announcement. A number of items included in the current budget from the capital improvement plan, and we're also working to provide long-term CIP needs this year. So one of the issues that you talked about in your work plan was developing that 5 to 10 year capital improvement plan so that you can start seeing what your reserves you have and what the ways that we can start funding those capital improvements going on in the future. We're also looking at developing policies for next year, for the next recession. I don't know when that will be, but we're working with the budget subcommittee to develop reserve requirements. I'll go talk a little bit more about this later. And we're also working with the budget and subcommittee to develop funding plans for long-term liabilities. Clay mentioned a little bit of those, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later. You have the general plan update going on still. Draft DIR for the Baylon's completed, which provides a lot of base technical documents for the general plan, but that doesn't do the general plan update itself. And also working with council to determine level of review of previously completed documents. So there's a number of documents that council has looked at in the past, but you probably need to go back and take a fresh look because it's been 2 or 3 or 4 years since some of those were done. In NIPD's, we're doing the financial analysis. There's a lot more requirements from the Regional Water Quality Water Board.
Would you spell that out, please, Stuart? NIPD's?
National Pollution Discharge Elimination System.
There you go. Thank you.
Federal program, right?
Yeah, it is a federal program. We're looking at a proposed increase in the franchise fee for the solid waste as a mechanism to pay for some of the additional costs that we're going to be facing. We have the economic development program. We have the ULI charrette was completed, Urban Land Institute. That one I didn't know off the top of my head. We've met with various local and regional stakeholders over the last year, and in this upcoming budget, we set aside funding for an expanded program, and I can talk about that a little bit. For the marina maintenance and funding, we did hire the staff to carry out repairs, so the repairs are beginning. We've also developed a plan for the dredging project, and we'll be bringing more of that information to you during the fiscal year. One of the things I'd like to do is also go over the accomplishments in the past, and there have been a number of these. We have the RFP for the skateboard park design. I believe that the proposal is coming back to you with a design firm in the near future. We did complete the draft of the EIR and it's been commented on. We developed an action plan for the sustainability plan for the Baylands. We completed fire station repairs. We approved the financing plan for the water and sewer projects. As I said before, we completed the ULI charrette, approved business license for the liquid storage facilities, upgraded technology for the police department. That was something that, as Clay said, we've been holding off on a lot of our ongoing maintenance, and they've been working with technology from 2005, 2006. We're now in 2014. It was time for them to come more into the modern era. We approved the MOA for the Baylands dirt storage. We bought additional open space in the Brisbane acres. And that was the list of accomplishments. We also, in the past, have talked about revenue opportunities for the city. So one of them that we had the voters vote on and bringing back to you at, I think, your next council meeting is a business license fee for the tank fuel facilities and operations. I know Clay has kept you up to date on that, where we're looking at setting a fee of $135,000 this year in the current fiscal year, and we'd have it again in next fiscal year. We're looking, at the economic development program, encouraging more business in Brisbane. As I said, we've set aside money in the budget as the economic development subcommittee has recommended. We also have the recycling business license in place at $2.1 million. You've also, as Clay mentioned, looked at the work plan for 2014-2015, and that's really what the budget is trying to accomplish. So you have the ecology expansion project is going on. You have the Baylands, the EIR specific plan, the sustainability plan, the community plan. So there's a lot going on for the Baylands over the next year. The general plan update. You have the housing element update. You have the Sierra Point design guidelines, the grading ordinance update, the green building ordinance update. Now you're beginning to see why there is a need for additional staff in the planning department with as much going on as they have. We are keeping up with the airport noise issue. We're planning a location for new city facilities. So you've got the library that you're looking at, you got the skate park, you got affordable housing, as well as the mixed-use economic development opportunities. You also have the regional water quality permit and waste franchise agreement. You have fiscal planning issues, and this is, of course, the one that's most near and dear to my heart. You have OPEB funding. OPEB is other post-retirement employee benefits. The biggest one of those is health care. So that's one of the issues that we need to really figure out, how do we set money aside for. Right now there's an unfunded liability of about $6 million in that. So we need to, and we're working with the Open Space and Ecology Committee. Good. Working with the Budget Subcommittee. I've gotten proposals or ideas from a couple of different firms on how they would recommend that we, not only how do we fund it, but how do we invest our money to make sure we can meet our obligations. You've got the Capital Replacement Fund funding that we need to do. As you see, we're having a large catch-up this year, but we don't want to just do this on a one-year-by-one-year basis. We'd like to have a plan for how we do this in the future. Equipment replacement funding, we're beginning to go through this with the computers in City Hall, where they are getting very outdated, and we need to really look at our computer system. You also have the cars and all those kinds of things, the vehicle replacement funding. You got the technology replacement funding, facility maintenance funding. We have a lot of facilities, and we're beginning to catch up on some of the deferred maintenance. If you look in the budget, we have things for Mission Blue, we have things for the community center, we have things for the pool. So we really need to start thinking, how do we not only attack these on a one-year basis by one-year basis, but what is the plan going forward to maintain everything? And then you start getting into some of the more esoteric kinds of issues. You know, what's the minimum reserve level you need for physical emergencies? And, you know, earthquakes, issues like that. So if something goes horribly wrong in the town, how much money do we think we need to cover that? How much do we need for the recovery process? And how much do we think we're going to need because there may be some decrease in our revenues going forward? You also have reserves required for economic emergencies. If you have another recession, how much money should we have set aside to cover us through recessions? So those are a number of the issues in the fiscal planning that the subcommittee is going to be hopefully working on this year. Our mission as a city is to efficiently providing quality public services, facilities, and programs by respecting community values. As you know, I've come here a lot talking about values of the community and how we try and meet those, applying necessary resources and commitment to meet prospective challenges and the expectations of the citizens and the business community of Brisbane. Moving on to the budget itself. Last year I had a theme stable, moving to a stable budget. This year we're catching up from the recession. That was kind of cool having themes for their budget. That's what I get for being with a writer, for a wife. So the overall picture of the budget for 14-15. We have revenues plus transfers in of about $14.7 million. We have expenditures plus transfers out of $15.3 million. We have a net impact to the balance in the general fund of about $600,000, and the projection is we'll have about a little over $10 million available after this fiscal year. Subcommittee might look a little bit strange. When I was talking to the subcommittee, I did not use the mid-year reprojection for what the fund balance was at the end of this year, and I'm also hoping that it will be a little bit better than we thought. So overall, you have about a $600,000 deficit, and you'll have $10 million in the general fund balance at the end of the year.
Stuart, before you go on, in our subcommittee, we talked about just kind of showing last year's recommended, but you have a slide that will show.
We do have a slide for that. It's a little bit further on.
All right, no worries.
Okay. So one of the questions that always comes up when you talk about general fund reserves is what is that made up of? It's not all cash that you can spend. So of that around $10 million, a little over $10 million, we have about $2 million out there in loans receivable. $800,000 is for housing for the department heads, and there's about a $1.2 million loan to the successor agency. There's also advances to other funds. There's $540,000 that the general fund advanced to the utility fund when the utility fund didn't have enough cash to make their payments. And there's also $850,000 to the capital improvement fund, which is when we bought the house or the property on visitation. So those are not cash items. Those are things that are owed to the general fund, and that's something that you're not going to see in the budget. So the budget only shows year by year what is happening. So those things that get carried over from previous years, those things that are liabilities, those things that are set aside reserves are not budget issues. Those are what you would find those, as Clay said, in the end of year report in the annual financial report. There's a fire. We have about $150,000 sitting out there for the fire sinking fund. So when fire has major replacement of something like their turnouts or something like that, it's not hitting all in 1 year. So what fire is doing for that, we would like to take that model and bring it to a lot of other areas. So we're not having, when you need to buy a vehicle once every 10 years, it doesn't spike the budget in that 1 year, that you set aside a little bit every year. So that way when you know you're going to have it, you're going to have the money set aside. So what we have in the fire sinking fund, we'd like to bring to everybody else. But we do have about $7 million in cash in the general fund. And if you look at the monthly reports that I give you, if you look at it, we have about $4 million sitting in the general fund, and we have about $3 million sitting in the rainy day fund in cash. So if you look at that, it relates back.
The fire sinking fund would go towards a new fire engine
If we got one, if we needed one.
So we add money each year to it?
Right.
Okay, good.
But I think it's more for a lot of the other kinds of equipment that would go on the fire engine. Because, 150,000 is probably, we only set aside 20,000 a year. If you get a fire engine at about 600,000, we would need to set aside more. But, when you start talking about needing to replace hoses, needing to replace turnouts, those kinds of things I think are more for that. So that's one of the issues I think we need to bring back is how do we replace all of our vehicles?
Right.
Like how do we replace our VACCON, how do we replace, our cars, how do we replace our trucks and all that?
So some of this money that we have is we are not liable to see again, actually. The loan to the successor agency, that is money that we may or may not even have a recourse on.
The last time the Oversight Board talked about these, they did approve the loans. So we are supposed to be able to start in 14, 15, start repaying ourselves for loans that the city gave to the redevelopment agency. The Oversight Board has never said any of the loans should not be repaid. So there's a high likelihood that we will get repaid. I just can't tell you what year that will be. Because the way that it works is any new revenue that the successor agency gets, 50% goes to the underlying taxing districts, and then 50% is used to repay loans that were made to the previous redevelopment agency. Of that amount, the first call on it is money that was loaned to the housing fund. And I think the housing fund has about $4 million owed to it. So it's going to take a while for that $4 million to be repaid. After that, then the city can start getting repaid. So we won't probably see money getting repaid from the successor agency either when something builds to really improve the assessed value out there, or until the bonds get paid off. So it's going to take a while. But I think, based on what the Oversight Board has said, I think we have, in 75 or higher % chance of getting that money. I don't think the Department of Finance is going to argue that point anymore. I don't think.
But it's a decade or two down the road.
Yes, and it's not a cash issue. Absolutely.
And as is the advances to the 1.3 million other funds.
No, the Capital Improvement Fund, we are beginning to make annual payments. That was part of the agreement that when we loaned the money from the general fund to the Capital Improvement Fund. So we're making payments out of the business license revenues that we get. We are paying that off. And I think we have a 10-year repayment for that. And we'll get a little bit every year and get back in cash. And then the utility fund, we actually have enough cash in the fund set aside that we might want to look at making that repayment this year. I think we have a couple of $1 million set aside in cash. And it may be time for this, for the utility fund to pay back the general fund. And I think what we just need to do is have a better understanding of what the long-term prospects of the utility fund are before we finalize that.
Just one other quick question, and maybe this is for you, Clay. Are we at liberty to talk about the case against the State Board of Equalization? What's hanging?
I think in general terms, it's a case that's for the court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, we won the initial case of against them, right? And
Right. We have a judgment at the lower court level, and I think the value of that was somewhere around $4.5 million. I believe.
$4.5 million.
4.5.
And then there was our attorney's fees were about $1 million, but then the firm that was able to also get an award of attorney fees. So our number actually could be closer to the 4.5 million. And then we have an appeal. We've appealed that decision, as has the state. We appealed that it should go back, be retroactive to the time that we filed the initial claim, which was somewhere, I think, in 2002, if I'm
2001. Yeah.
2001, 2002. and that total value would be somewhere in the $9 to $10 million.
Yeah.
And when is that due to come forward?
Oh boy, that is quite the process. I think it's probably, as I understand it, off the top of my head, it's probably another 6 months before it's supposed to hit.
The written arguments have been
Written arguments have been submitted.
to the appellate court.
Yeah, but I think it's another 6 months or so before you got a court date, from what I understood.
Okay.
Not money we should count on yet.
No, I'm just saying that this is, focus on the positive sometimes and things happen.
So this is
Jerry, please.
the sales tax from Walmart operation?
Yeah, this is the sales tax, what we refer to as it's basically our lawsuit against the state of California, the Board of Equalization, and Walmart.com was the taxpayer, but they were not involved in the legal proceedings.
Right. Walmart paid their taxes. Right. It's how they were distributed. We believed it should have been situs-based, and the Board of Equalization believed it should have been dispersed to the counties where the purchases were made.
That's a point that sometimes people get confused on, not you folks, but I hear it from time to time in the business community that we sued Walmart. We never sued Walmart. We sued the state of California. And Walmart was really, it didn't matter to them one way or another in the end because they had already paid the taxes. It's just a matter of where the state chose to disperse them to.
And Walmart was very cooperative with us in the process.
The facts.
Yes.
Facts.
Very good. Thank you.
Welcome. So moving on to the next slide. So this shows you what we annually budgeted, what we were expecting the change in the general fund to be, which is the slants to downward right is what we thought was going to happen in the budget in that year when we adopted it. The checkerboard blue, if it's blue, hopefully it's blue on your screens, but in the middle column is what actually happened. So if you look at it, 2009 we were projecting a little over $1 million deficit. In 2009 we ended up a little bit better than that, maybe a $250,000, $300,000 deficit. In 2010 we projected over a bigger deficit. In 2010 we had only $1 million deficit. 2011 was our worst year when looking at the budget itself and what actually happened. In 2012 we budgeted a slight deficit. We had well over $1 million in surplus that year. In 2013 we budgeted again about $1 million in a deficit, and we had over $1 million in surplus. And if you look at, we are about where we were in 2013. We are just about back to where we were in 2009 with our fund balance. So it dipped and then it came back, which is why we think this is a good time to start doing a lot of the deferred maintenance that we haven't been doing and catching up on a lot of the projects that we haven't been doing. So recommended budget, it's continuing to support services and facilities that have already been approved. We're adding staff to provide increased services, catching up on deferred items, and as I said, it's really a budget for improved economic times. As I tell everybody on staff, if in 2007, 2008 you knew that was the good year, you would have enjoyed it more. So this is the good year, I tell staff. Hopefully we all enjoy it. 14, 15, I think will be a very good financial year for the city, and I think we can do a lot of good things for the community this year.
Can I ask a quick question? So can you talk briefly about why in the last 2 fiscal years we've come out much further ahead in terms of what we anticipated with the budget?
Sure. A lot of it is due to a lot of positions being held open over that period of time. We've had some revenues that have been improving. The transient occupancy tax has improved over the time. This year, last year we were at 1.6 million. I was probably budgeting closer to 1.2, 1.3, because that's been improving. And this year, as I've told council, we're looking at maybe 2 million. in transportation and transient occupancy tax, the hotel revenues that we get. So hotels have recovered. So that's a big one. I think one of those years I was not, we had not fully projected all of Recology money coming in 2013. I think when we adopted the budget, we thought we might only get half of that amount, but we wrote the ordinance to collect all of it in that year. So we were thinking we might only get 1 million, we got 2 million. So I mean, there's some of that, but as Clay has said, we've had a lot of open positions. The police department was down 4 or 5 positions over the period of time, and then anytime somebody leaves, it took a while for us to fill. Same thing that we're going through now in filling positions. So that was part of it. Sales tax was a little bit better in a couple of those years than we had thought. One of those years, I don't remember which one, VWR we knew was leaving. I think it was in 2012, 2013. So I didn't budget any of it, but they were still here for another quarter. Room and board has come into town. That was better that was something we hadn't anticipated. Business license was up a little bit in one of those years. So there's a whole lot of different kinds of, some revenues, and the other one is that staff over the last, few years has really gotten the message, don't spend money if you don't have to. So there's been a lot of savings from that aspect as well. Okay. New positions, I already mentioned them, so I'll just flip through to the last one. We're also looking to reclassify our senior accountant tech to a payroll and utility tech position. So what that would do is it would raise the salary a little bit, but we would also take away the assignment pay that we're giving the person. So in reality, what will happen is the person will actually have less take-home pay. So the city will save money from that perspective. Between the reduction in the what we're paying for the other duties, assignment pay, and the difference between that and what she will get in salary and in what we have to pay for PERS will be less than what we're paying her for the assignment pay. So the city will save money by this, but assignment pay is not a PERSable benefit, so she will get a bump in her PERS retirement. It's one of those strange things. If you are assigned a job on a long-term basis, it's not PERSable. Whereas if you are assigned a job on a short-term basis, it is. So we're just trying to make it right for her as she's beginning to think of her retirement. But it does save the city money. Kind of a strange aspect of PERS. Then we start going through all the deferred projects that we have. Police department's looking at buying a vehicle. They need to replace their in-car cameras. So when we start talking about equipment replace, this is something that we don't set aside money for, that we know we're going to need to in the future, but we should do. Vehicle is going to buy a new vehicle. Fire is buying a new vehicle to replace the old inspector vehicle that we gave them when we got into the contract. That vehicle needs to be replaced, so we have to replace it. We're going to do slope repair at 266 Santa Clara. We're going to fix potholes out of Measure M money. There's a retaining wall on San Bruno Ave that we're going to do, so the plastic and the sandbags will go away at some point in time. Mission Blue needs a storage shed. Mission Blue needs its interior painted. If you go there, I think everybody will agree. Community Center needs to be repainted again and to put a chair rail. So when we've done this in the past, we've painted it, then we end up putting chairs up against the wall, and it scuffs up the paint, and we need to do it sooner. So that rail that you put along at chair height, we'll put that up so that way we can protect the walls going forward. The community park gazebo needs painting. The community center, we're going to repair the retaining wall in the back. Energy saving measures and recreation facilities will cost us about $4,000. Community center, putting a handrail outside will cost about $25,000. Hey,
Outside of where?
I'm going to look to you for the community center and for the
It's
handrail.
It's the walk basically up. If you're going out the back end of the building, it's the traverse from there up to the terraced level. where we have kind of a wall that's dilapidated and kind of fallen apart, a retaining wall, and we don't have a handrail. So it's I think something you've heard from at least one of our citizens on a fairly consistent basis that we need to do that.
So it's sort of an indirect consequence of building the community park in the back to make it more handicapped accessible?
Yeah, I mean,
Accessible?
it was always there, and it probably always should have been done, you know. But yes, I think you're right. Now that it's going to get more use and it's more kind of open area, it's the need is more prominent.
Okay. No, I just wanted to know exactly where because I was trying to.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to paint the exterior of the fire station. We're going to replace the HVAC units at the fire station. And then energy saving measures for City Hall fire and the fire station. We're looking at doing some of those. A concept plan for the Tulare to Alvarado walkway, the bicentennial walkway railing installation and bollard replacement. We also have set aside, and this is something new for us as a city, we haven't done this in the period of time that I've been here, is we've set aside $100,000 for future projects that the public or the city council might want to do. So we have money set aside in the budget for that. We have money for to repair the printer for the community park sign. Looking to do the canvas shade at the pool. If you go, one of the canvas shades is completely torn up and gone. We're looking to resurface and replaster and retile the pool floor. It's been 15, 16 years since we've opened it. We need to do that. Rust proofing and repainting the gazebo. The pool deck needs a concrete repair as well around. If you go walk around it, you'll notice there's kind of chips and there's some rust showing, which is never a good sign when you're near water to have rust. When we do those kinds of things, we're going to actually need to close the pool itself, and we're looking at doing this in the fall-winter time frame. We're also looking at doing a gateway project. This is something the Economic Development Subcommittee has talked about, is doing a gateway project. So we're setting money aside for that as well. In the non-general fund items, we have needing a light on Sarah Point. That's going to be about $50,000. That's going to actually be paid for out of the Sarah Point Lighting and Landscaping Fund, so it won't cost the citizens. It'll cost the people who contribute to that. We're looking in the utility fund. There's a drought contingency plan. There's a water master plan, a sewer master plan, a Sarah Point road sewer main replacement, and a sewer camera. None of these are really the large projects that we're bonding for. These are smaller projects that we're going to be doing out of ongoing revenues. And then for the marina, we've got $100,000. We need a new boat. And Randy can talk more about the fact that we can't go rescue our boaters who are stranded out in the bay. So within the general fund itself...
One quick interjection. If I'm correct on this, the Sierra Point light is the one at the corner of Sierra Point Parkway and Lagoon. All right? Okay. And the reason I mention that is the member of the audience brought it up once, and we're following up.
Okay. So the total cost of general fund deferred projects is $761,000. So there's a lot of deferred maintenance, deferred projects that we have not been working on over the years. And this also gets to the point as to, again, why we need to have a plan going forward. There's a couple of new ongoing costs in the budget. We have an increase for police technology. So as the police becomes more in tune to what what the current needs are, there's also a need to keep it up to date, to have it monitored 24/7, which we really can't do from a staff perspective because we don't have anybody who works 24/7 at that level. So there's a cost for doing that, and that's about $31,000, $32,000 for the year. And then we have $75,000 sitting out there for economic development for this year.
Is that a placeholder?
That is a placeholder. We're not quite sure. My understanding is we're not quite sure what it will be yet. But if we're looking at hiring somebody on we wouldn't be hiring them until January at the earliest. Or if we're looking at contracting with the Chamber of Commerce, so that is a placeholder.
Okay.
As I talked about, improving revenues. So one of the other revenue sources that has been helpful for us over the past few years has been the truck haul fees. And what you'll see when we give you the master fee schedule is that we're looking at an 18-cent per cubic yard increase in the fee for that. We haven't provided that to you yet, but I will do that soon. The transient occupancy tax, I'm projecting a 5% increase from the current year where we are. We're seeing very robust numbers, especially with the DoubleTree. The DoubleTree had a much better month year over year than would have been expected if you just have been what's going on this year. So I think the DoubleTree is a very good product for our town.
It's more transient occupancy tax income 5%
Yes.
increase. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like a 5% increase.
No,
in tax.
no, in the income. Sorry.
Of course, if we could do that in the budget, why not? But
Why not?
I know it's not legal.
No, I can't do that.
We need to vote on that.
Need a vote.
I know.
Yes, the revenue will increase 5%. Property tax, we're expecting about half of the new houses in the Northeast Ridge will come online in our property tax. That'll be about $50,000. And then, as Clay was saying, that sometimes you find out things at the last minute. This one I was able to get in. So 2 weekends ago, the county went back and re-looked at what they would call their AB8 values. So when the recession hit, a number of property owners had automatic reductions in their property tax without having to appeal to the county. What they said was they with the reduction in values throughout the county, they would start looking at every house that was sold after, I think, 2002, 2003, and see how that would compare if it was sold at that time in 2009. And those houses that they had that they said was worth less than what the assessed value was, they automatically reduced that. So a lot of people have been paying a lot less in property taxes than they would have been if they were just getting their normal increases from their their highest assessed value. About a couple of weeks ago, I got an email that somebody said they looked at the county website and that their assessed value went up a lot over the weekend because the county has a website that finance directors look at. Ours went from a 3% projected increase to about an 8% projected increase. And the reason was that was a lot of the AB8 values coming back. So there's going to be a lot of people who will have increases in their assessed value and therefore their property taxes this year. So I was able to get that into the budget, and I think that was worth about $70 to $80,000 to us is what that was worth.
And that would be to the school district too. Then.
The school district will get about the same, right? Which will be good because then we'll get more money back through ERAF. So that'll be nice. Yeah. Property tax from the former RDA, so the accessor agency, we're going to probably see about 150% above what I had projected last time. So I had projected 100,000. We're going to probably see, I got in the budget, I think, 250,000 this year. Although I will tell you that the successor agency is paying the city 170,000 in June for our share of what we're getting. So even the 250,000 is probably a conservative estimate as to what we will see next year. And that was due when we reduced the bond payments. It increased the amount of money that was available to be paid.
So, Stuart, can you just explain that? I thought that, with the structure of doing the successor agency, that there was a maximum amount of $250,000 that we could use.
Right.
So where does that come in?
That's actually just when you look, with the successor agency budget, we charge ourselves to the successor agency. So I charge a portion of myself, a portion of Betsy, a portion of Clay, a portion of Sherry. So those numbers don't appear in the city budget at all. Those people appear only in the successor agency budget. So that's how we account for that $200,000 or $250,000. This is the amount of money in excess property tax that the successor agency does not need in order to make its payment commitments.
Okay. They just happen to be...
The same number. Just happen to be. Next year we'll have more than the $250,000 in this aspect of it. Some improving revenues. Sales tax, we're projecting a 3% increase. We just had a meeting with our sales tax auditors last week, and my projections are slightly below theirs for the upcoming fiscal year and then the next 5 years. So they think we'll actually do a little bit better than I do. So that's good news. The franchise fee for solid waste, we're looking at increasing at 2% to 12%. Business license for liquid waste storage, liquid storage tanks. Sorry, not waste. That was in effect. If I was only in South San Francisco,
I didn't know.
if I was in South San Francisco, I could make money.
How about wasted liquid storage?
Yeah, that would be.
Okay.
A moment of truth. Business license for recycling facilities is a 5% increase per the agreement. So looking overall of the city, all funds that we have, so all funds includes not only the general fund, but includes the debt service, includes the utility, includes the marina, and all the special revenues. So when you start including the marina and you start including the water and sewer, as you would expect, charges for services is our highest revenue source. Property taxes is about 20%, sales tax at 11%, transient occupancy tax 9%. You would also think with how we're charging for recology, recology being over $2.1 million, that's also a very large portion of our overall revenues. On the expenditure side, the public works does not show up as well here as it does on my computer. So the largest chunk is public works. When you start talking about water and sewer, that's a very large portion. And then you start, you have other ones being fire, you have police, debt service. And I've got a slide talking about debt service, so I'll talk about a little bit that more as I go on. But overall, from a overall citywide expenditure, public works is our largest expense, and that's because they do the water and sewer fund. If we switch more to the general fund only, property taxes at 19%, license and permits are at 26% for this as well. Amazingly enough, it's the same number. Transient occupancy tax, 15%, sales tax at 18%. Those are our large revenue sources. On the general fund expenditures, this is, what really happens here is that public safety becomes your number one priority for the general fund. So the money that you have the most discretion over, the focus is on public safety. So 45% of our expenditures are for public safety. Recreation is 13% of the general fund. Public works is 12%. Admin is, your finance department, your city manager, your human resources. Policy is, actually, admin doesn't include city manager. Policy includes city manager and the city council. Non-departmental is only 4%. Community development 7%. Apologize to John. It doesn't have the same priorities as police. One of the things that I really want to talk about tonight, because I think a lot of confusion happens when people look at our budget, is not really understanding all the different funds that we have. And, people always ask, if you have so much money sitting aside in your water and sewer, why do you have to, or why don't you just use general fund to pay for water and sewer? Why don't you use water and sewer funds to pay for general fund items? Or why don't they pay for like Parks and Recreation or something? So let me go through all the different funds that we have and try and clean up some of that misunderstanding that I hear when I walk around town. Because when I walk around town, people just talk about budget to me. I don't know why. Don't know.
It's that T-shirt you wear.
So yeah, talk budget to me. So the general fund is what people really think about when they think about the city. What? Okay, just go on. Sorry. Anyway, so the general fund is what people think when you think about the city. People really only think about the general fund because that's what provides most of the services that people think about when they think of the city. It's what pays for police, what pays for fire, it's what pays for the community development department. The things where people have that interaction with.
Public works.
And interestingly enough, it pays for some of public works. The real big portion of public works is water and sewer. And that's one of those weird ones for me, because when we did the survey a few years ago, do you have interaction with public works? Most of the people in town do not think they do. I don't understand that, but they don't think that they interact with Public Works, even though they drive a car to get to work every day, which is Public Works. But so when people think about it, that's what they think of. There's a few special revenue funds, so like the gas tax. When we get the gas tax in, it can only be used for what is specifically allowed under gas tax law. So we have to account for that differently. So it's counted for in the gas tax fund. Measure A. Measure A can only be used for specific things, so we account for that separately. That's a special fund. When Sierra Point Lighting and Landscaping District, that's a special fund because it can only be used for what Sierra Point Lighting and Landscaping District allows us to use it for, and only in that area. NIPDs, that's a special fund because we collect money specifically for that, but we also don't collect enough money for that, so the general fund contributes to it as a transfer. So special funds can't be used for things other than what's prescribed by law. And so it's not really available for the full use within the city. Debt service. This is used for accounting for all of our debt paid by the city and the city's subsidiary Brisbane Financing Authority. So if we sell a bond to get money to pay for something, so like water, when we're going to sell the bond for the water and sewer projects, the debt is going to be accounted for within the debt service fund. The debt service fund will have a lot of reserves because one of the requirements by most of the bonds that we sell is that we keep a 1 year's payment in reserves. And that's by contract that we have to do that. So that money can't be used for any other purpose other than keeping it in reserve. And we try and invest it the best way that we can, but the money can't be used for something else. And what that does is assures the bond payers that if for some reason we can't make a bond payment, that they have at least 1 year's worth of bond payment available to them. So that's the debt service fund, and I'll go through, as I said, I'll go through that a little bit more. Then you have enterprise funds. These are operations within the city which operate more like a business. So the water, sewer, GVMID, and marina are the four that we have, and the water, sewer, and GVMID are combined into one fund called the utility fund. So these are funds that are supposed to be like a business, fully paying for themselves. So if you were going to, do something in water and sewer, that is as close as we get to a private, from an economic term, a private good. You turn on the water, you're using the water, no one else can use your water. So that's a private good, so no different than going to McDonald's and buying a hamburger. When you buy the hamburger, no one else, unless they steal it, can eat your hamburger. So therefore, that's a private good. So we treat those things that are private goods like you would treat a business. So they should be fully supporting themselves. The only difference is with the utility fund, we do transfer in some money from the general fund to cover our low-income rate reduction plan. Because one of the rules with water and sewer is one ratepayer cannot pay the costs of another ratepayer. So if you do a reduction for low-income residents, or low-income residents, then other businesses or other people can't pay for that unless they donate. So that way it has to come from the general fund. So the enterprise funds should be paying for their own way. No different than a business should be, if the business doesn't bring in enough money, it needs to do something to reduce costs or go out of business. The same thing should happen with enterprise funds.
And that comes from them having to be on PG&E's lifeline?
Right, for the low-income residents. Right. So people, we do about $70,000 to $80,000 is what the transfer is for the low-income people on water and sewer.
I think it's fixed, right? Fixed income.
Well, low income.
Income challenge.
The people who are on lower incomes on the PG&E Care program. So if you're on the PG&E Care program, you can get a reduced rate for us for water and sewer. And during the recession, a lot of people took advantage of that. We ask people, we usually go out to everybody once every couple of years to re-verify that they're still on the PG&E program. Then we have what's called internal service funds. These are used for internal bookkeeping to ensure proper accounting of costs. So these include things like the city's liability fund, the workers' compensation costs, dental insurance, flexible spending account. So these could be accounted for in a different way, but we wouldn't have as much robust information. So, for instance, the city's liability fund. Every year we budget a certain amount in case of lawsuits, in case of accidents, or whatever. And what we do is we say, okay, we're going to charge each department a little bit every year, and they're going to put the money into a separate fund that we're going to account for. And then if there's an accident, as opposed to having a big hit to the general fund in one year, we will pay for it out of the internal service fund. Last year we talked about this a little bit, that we had $1 million available in fund balance. Our self-retention is $25,000. So if we have a liability charge against us, we would only pay $25,000 if it's a covered event out of our own pocket. So we have a lot of excess there. So last year we had talked about moving $650,000 from the liability fund into the general fund. At mid-year we found out that our revenues were high enough and our expenses were low enough that we actually did not make that transfer. So this year, with the $761,000 worth of one-time deferred maintenance costs, we are going to make that. We're going to once again recommend making that $600,000 transfer, and we'll come back at mid-year to see if that was actually, if we need to do that or if we should save it. One of the concerns I had last year at mid-year was, we had potential issues with the liquid storage business license, maybe being litigated. We don't think we're going to have that since the Kinder Morgan has made proposals to us. So we think we're safe in doing that. Even if we could bring down $600,000, we'd still have $400,000, which would cover 16 full hits to what our self-insurance is. So we account for that inside the liability fund, but it's internal to the organization. So that's why we call it an internal service fund. Same thing for workers' comp, same things for dental insurance. So that's what an internal service fund. So really the goal is not to spend those things on other items unless council makes a conscious decision to do that. And it should only be done cautiously, making sure that all of the costs within that fund are going to be covered before you make a decision to spend money elsewhere. And then we have two other kinds of funds, trust funds and agency funds. So trust funds are funds which account for money held by the city in trust for specific purposes. So the open space fund would be considered a trust fund. The piano fund would be a trust fund. The swimming pool fund would be, so if somebody donates money to us for some purpose, it becomes a trust fund. The recreation facilities is a trust fund because people have donated money to us for recreational facilities. We can't spend it on something else. We're holding it in trust for that purpose. So, if you have money sitting in the recreational facilities fund and you want to go buy a police car, you can't use that money in the recreation fund for that purpose. Agency funds are funds that we hold held by the city for outside entities. So, all of the planning deposits that we have are held as agency funds. So again, that's not money that we can use broadly throughout the city. It can only be used for the purpose that we got the money for. So hopefully that kind of explains. I think I spent more time tonight talking about the different funds than I normally do, but I also know there's a lot of confusion when you start talking about how much money is held in cash in a lot of the funds. Then why don't you just use money in your facility fees to pay for ongoing sewer rates? Well, that's not what it was collected for. So you can't use money interchangeably like that. So that's why I want to make sure that I spent enough time on that one tonight. Going through the debt service. So debt service, as I said, is made up of a lot of different types of debt service. So we have two different pension obligation bonds. These are paid for by the general fund. One is going to be paid off in 2021, and one will be paid off in 2023. So at the time that the 2021 bond was at the time that we became part of a bigger PERS trust. So originally with PERS, every agency had their own account within PERS.
Spell out PERS.
Public employee.
The retirement system. Sorry. And this is this is the public retirement system. So I think it was in 2005, maybe a little bit earlier, what CalPERS was noticing was that small agencies were having large variations in their costs from year to year, for no other reason than maybe an early retirement or somebody got off on somebody had a disability retirement. So there was a large cost that they were going to pay that they had not had enough years to save up for. Whereas the larger entities with more than 100 employees, did not have that same type of fluctuation. So they took all the entities that were below 100 and put it into one large trust fund in PERS. So that way the variations of any individual wouldn't have a large impact on it. So you wouldn't have large swings year to year by individual cities. At that same time, though, a lot of the cities had unfunded liabilities. They had money that they should have had saved up to that period of time but had not. So what we did is we said, okay, let's just sell a pension obligation bond. Let's have it terminate at the same period in time that PERS would have had us finish repaying the unfunded liability to them. So there was no change in how long we were paying off our debt. But what it did do was PERS was charging us, I think at that time, 7.75% for the money that we were borrowing from PERS, and we went out on the open market and borrowed it closer to 5%. So we had just a pure interest rate savings when we did that. We didn't extend the life of it, we just saved money when we did that. The other one came when we went and upped our retirement system from 2 at 55 to 2.7 at 55. It created another small unfunded liability for the city. PERS said we had until 2023 to pay that off, 15 years, because we did that in 2008. And we said the same thing. We can go out and borrow money cheaper than PERS was willing to loan it to us. So we went and did that without extending the life of the debt. So all we did was save money. So both of those are being paid for by the general fund. City Hall, we have 2 bonds outstanding, one that's due in 2035 and one that's due in 2029. And all those are paid for by the general fund. But there's a number of other debts that we have that are not paid for by the general fund. So we have the utility fund sales agreement, which is due in 2032. We have a portion of, and that one, the sales agreement was just what we just refinanced, again, on an interest rate basis to save money. We didn't extend out the loan. We just refinanced it. There was a portion of the 2005 lease revenue bond that was sold that pays off in 2017. That was for the water tanks. There's a housing authority loan that is being tracked through there. And then there's the Northeast Ridge Assessment District, which we pay off in 2031. So it's not just the general fund that is making all those debt payments. It's not just the citizens that are making all those debt payments. It's being paid for by a variety. The debt service fund is being paid for by a variety of sources.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
The Northeast Ridge Assessment District?
Yes.
Explain what that is.
Sure. So there was, when the Northeast Ridge built, there was a number of improvements that had to be made that the city was used as a conduit to borrow money for. And it's being paid off by the individual property owners of the Northeast Ridge. So we sold the bonds because we were able to get a better interest rate than you could if you were to sell them on a private basis. And then there's an assessment on every parcel in the Northeast Ridge to give us enough money to make the bond payment.
So this is so that the city could put in sewer and streets and
Yes.
lighting so that the developer didn't have to pay that cost up front, or because we're, as a city, responsible to put that infrastructure there?
I wasn't here at the time, but normally it's because those are considered public improvements that we ask the developer to pay for. And one of the methods where they can pay for it is they can pay for it over time through this bond. So from an economic perspective for the homeowners, if you were to ask a developer to pay $30 million to do those kinds of public improvements, what they would do is look at it and say, okay, we still need to make X dollars, so we'll just raise everybody's house price by that 30 million divided by however many houses we think we're going to sell. Or, so that way the original homeowner ultimately ends up paying for that full improvement. Or the other way you can do it is say, okay, let's create an assessment district and have a little bit paid for every year by the homeowners and pay off the bond. So that way the people who live there end up paying for the improvements that they have. The same issue that we talked about with the water and sewer bonds is who pays for it. Should it be the person who's there today, or should it be the person who uses it over the life of that facility? So the answer is yes to both. That yes, it's something that the developer would pay for, but it's also something that the developer calculates into the sale price of the house anyway. So this way it allows the homeowners to extend it over a longer period of time and with tax-free interest rates, as opposed to if they were to try and do it within their house at a mortgage rate interest. So the answer is kind of both on that one.
Great, thank you. Now I
Yep.
just wanted to get a clarification.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on the same issue. So this particular assessment for the residents of the Northeast Ridge, just to make sure, this is different from the assessment that the Homeowners Association has imposed in order to deal with the necessary improvements to the common area. I'm speaking now particularly of Viewpoint, which had a significant assessment on all the different properties for their rehabilitation of a lot of the common areas.
Yes.
So that's a totally separate
Totally
thing,
separate
right?
thing, yes.
Okay. So maybe when we have this stipulated in some place, we might want to indicate what particular improvements we're talking about.
Okay, and I think if you look in the CAF,
there might be a
Right.
confusion as to, okay, so what assessment are you talking about?
so if you look in the CAFR, I know that we talk more in depth about what it is. And that's really where we start, we go more in depth in what all the bonds are for, what they're, once again, budget looks at a year-by-year issues, so we don't really talk in depth about what all the bonds are for, when they're going to get paid off. In the CAFR we do, and in the CAFR we go through a very long explanation as to what each of the bonds are for. And I think that's where we would find it, so we do have that. The budget process going forward, so you're going to review and hopefully review and adopt the budget in June. In June you're going to review and adopt the fee schedule, which I'll get to you, and review and adopt the GAN limit. And the GAN limit is the amount of taxes that we're legally allowed to collect. So back in 1978, when they did Prop 13, one of the issues that came out was, can cities collect more in taxes? And the answer is that there's a limit to what we can collect in taxes. And if we exceed that limit in taxes, we then need to refund it to taxpayers. Not necessarily the same taxpayers who have paid it. So we actually exceeded our GAN limit once in the 1990s, and what the City Council chose to do as part of their way to refund it was to reduce water and sewer rates in that year. So we're not anywhere near the top of what we're legally allowed to collect in taxes at this point. But that is a way that the Taxpayers Association limits what you can do with raising taxes. We also, as I've talked about in the past over and over again tonight, is that we also need to go back to the budget. The Finance Subcommittee more talk about policies for recession-oriented budgeting, as Clay talking about priority budgeting, but also talking about what kinds of reserves we think are needed, and then looking at all of our liabilities and what kind of reserves we need for all of our liabilities. I was thinking I was done, but I'm not. 5-year budget projections. This is going to be very quick. So what I do every year is I look where we're going to be in the future. I take very, I went in depth, and I don't know, probably half an hour, 45 minutes with the budget subcommittee, so I'm not going to do that to you, about all my assumptions on everything. But revenues, we're looking at a little bit of we're looking at solid growth because we're projecting linearly throughout. And then expenditures, we're also looking at some increases. Some of the big issues when it comes to expenditures, I do factor in a PERS increase as we know them, what we're expecting. I factor in a health insurance increase. I factor in a salary increase. I factor in some kinds of increases for our supplies and services. And the reason in 2018, 2019 you see such a drastic change in the reserve revenues versus expenditures, and you see expenditures stay fairly flat that year, is that's the beginning when we start paying off some of our pension obligation bonds. So I told you that we're paying off bonds in 2021. That's our first payoff date. Well, during that period of time, the public safety unfunded liability actually came due in 2019. So what we did is as I said, we didn't extend the length of time for any of the debt. So the public safety portion of that pension obligation bond expires in 2019, which is why you see that change in that year. Going through, looking at our projected ending fund balance, if we make no changes, we would still have about $7.4 million, and that's assuming that I actually got every single number right in this. It also assumes we don't have a recession. So, as I said, items that are not included in the projections, we have a lot of needs, and we've talked about this before. So we've got OPEB as a need. How are we going to pay for that? We've got new capital, we've got capital replacement, we've got equipment replacement, technology, vehicles, economic emergencies, recessions, a business going out of business, that would hurt us. So all those kinds of things are not in that projection. So don't spend all the money at once, please. And that ends my presentation.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Stuart. Any questions or clarifications that we haven't addressed while we went through the presentation?
I have one.
Okay.
So, Stuart.
Is your microphone on, Cliff?
Yeah, it is. Sorry. You had talked about that you had not projected a recession, perhaps, in your 5-year analysis. So, when would you say the last recession ended?
We probably started seeing revenues turning around a year ago, 2 years ago.
All right.
So it was probably 3 years.
And you've been in this business for a while. So what is the usual time span between recessions?
My guess is we'll probably see another one before the end of this decade. I mean, you normally see they come in waves. There's like a wave pattern every 10 years. There's a small recession every 5. There's a bigger one every 10. And then you start going through that kind of a process.
In this case, it was faster.
If you look at what the recession was, we had a small one in 01, 02. Then we had one in 07, 08. That one problem is we're just getting out of it. It happened about the right period of time. It was deeper than anybody would have thought, and it's lasted longer. Right. That's really the issue that I think with that recession.
Because of what caused it. Because of what caused it.
Because of what caused it. It wasn't just a natural downturn in the economy. It was an overheating of a lot of issues that, So that'd be my guess. My guess is we might see one. We're not going to see. I would really hope we're not going to see an 07, 08 style recession again. There is not really that same run up in values that we've seen. So if you think about things like the stock market, where we're sitting there and saying we're hitting new highs right now, if you take a much longer term view, 16,000 for the Dow is probably not an unreasonable rate of return from 1990, where it was in 1990 to now. Whereas if you looked at it 16,000 6 years ago, the Dow was at an unusual rate of return. So, I mean, that downturn really flattened that out and really brought the Dow down. People start talking about housing prices really ramping up, and they are. But, one of the things that I look at, when I moved in, I was thinking a reasonable rate of return on the value of a house every year is 2 to 4%. And so I moved in '01. So really the question is the value of houses today, 70, 80% more than they were in 2001? You're getting to that, but that would be considered a normal rate of return for what you'd expect in real estate, 2 to 4%. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think, where we are today, where we were in '07, '08, we should have been today. So I don't see us having the same kinds of issues that we had. I don't think so. I think we'll have a recession. I just don't think it's going to be as deep. I think the other thing that we're going to have that's going to be a benefit to us is we're going to have the baby boomers retiring more. And they're beginning to start feeling comfortable enough to retire. So you're not going to have the same number of people vying for jobs that we had 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So one of the things that happened 6 years ago is a lot of the boomers who thought they were about to retire had a decrease in their portfolio of 50% and said, I can't retire. So it really had a logjam of jobs that became available for people. So you had much more unemployment, and you're beginning to see the unemployment numbers drop. Part of it, and I just heard that we're beginning to, we no longer have the most people employed are in the boomer generation. In a year, it's now the younger generation. So they are going to work their way through, and the boomers are going to retire, and we're going to start seeing a little bit better job market. Hopefully what you'll see is that the boomers have saved enough for retirement, and that will be one of the, I think, the big challenges, is that might create some downward pressure on spending, because the boomers who thought they were going to be able to spend more in retirement will say, I don't really have that much money that I thought I had. So they won't spend as much as maybe they would have
just like people who
a
grew
decade
up
ago.
In the Depression.
They might have that. I mean, I think you'll see more of that with the millennials, where they'll be a little bit more frugal. So I think we will have a recession, and then if you start thinking about what does a recession do to the city of Brisbane?
Yeah, I was gonna.
I was gonna guess that was gonna be your next question.
Yeah, so I know you had that one slide that showed.
And I don't have it here. So let me walk you through.
You could use the revenue one. That showed what revenues were prior to the recession.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me talk. So let's talk about like the secured property tax. So in 2000, and I don't have it on my chart, but in 2007, 2008, we were about 1.9 million, and at our low point, we dropped to about 1.7, 1.75. So we lost about $150,000 worth of value in our property tax. So we're right back up to 2 million. So we're back, as I said, we're back where we were back in 07, 08. So let's say we lose another 150,000 out of property tax during the next recession. If you look at, sales tax, I project right around 2.4 million in sales tax. If we lose 10% of sales tax in a year, we'll lose another 200,000. We're not going to lose money out of recology because that's a fixed business. That's a fixed number. We'll lose money out of TOT, and TOT is projected right around 2 million. So let's say we lose another 200,000, 300,000 from there. So let's say we're down 700,000 in revenue in the next recession. Can you put up my 5-year projection slide? So like the second to last slide. Sorry. So exciting. Yep, that one. Oh, well, we can just leave. Okay. So, if you're looking at this, in 2018, 2019, we have $7.4 million in reserve. So if we lose 700,000 out of revenues, we can last, theoretically, 10 years in a recession and still not eat all the way through our numbers. And it may not be that long because, you might have some contract issues for employees, but that's something that we dealt with during the last recession, where we held on salaries, where we reduced, we had a reduction in salaries for a year. So, let's say you want to take 3 or 4 years to work through your course. I mean, that's what we did last time. And if you looked at it, we were about where we were in our fund balance, and we dropped down to somewhere between 6 and 7 million in fund balance. My guess is the same basic thing will happen during the next recession, and that would be a fairly significant recession, losing $700,000.
And that doesn't include our $10 million from the State Board of Equalization.
It does not include the $10 million that they owe us.
While you're on this slide, can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
It says it's a 5-year projection, but we have 4 years?
Right, because the current year, 14-15, which I went through in more detail, is the first year of the projection.
But it doesn't show there?
Oh, I'm sorry. It doesn't. You're right. But because I'd spent so much time on 14-15, I didn't think about putting it here. I apologize.
And, okay. I'll save my comments for later.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Anybody else? Ray, you had something you want to...
Yeah, I was looking through the big loose leaf folder here and binder, and I couldn't find anywhere that referred in any of the fund descriptions to our refunding, which we did just at the end of last year for the former redevelopment bonds. In the first part here where you have...
Oh, because that would be a successor agency. That would be a different entirely.
So how do we reference that?
I'd have to think about that. Because that's a different... That's not the city. That's a successor agency. And I was going to bring the successor agency budget forward separately as we were going through it. Because it's a separate debt service fund. I mean, it's got separate everything. It would be part of the CAFR ultimately. Let me think about how the best way to try and do that in this process. Because I mean, what it will show is that the revenues will be the same, the expenditures will come down, and we don't really spend a lot. We don't spend a lot of time on debt service, except for a year-to-year basis. So let me think about that.
201. You do have a recap of debt service for that budget. Page 201.
I do. I mean, it shows it there as the last item.
Where?
Page 201, the last bond issue. But it doesn't talk about the benefit of the refunding, and I think that's what you're getting at. And that would be more looking at the overall successor agency revenues and expenditures. So let me think. Yeah. And then I know there was like one question at one point in time that somebody's asked me is how much money do we spend on Brisbane Elementary School District items?
Yeah.
So in fiscal year 2012-2013, which is the last year that I have actual numbers for, we spent about $157,000, and that includes what we spend to maintain the fields. It's what we spend for different sports programs that we provide for the school. So, the basketball programs that we provide at the schools, the volleyball programs, flag football, it calls for the dances. It also covers the cost of our after-school programs. So what we do for Club Rec and what we do for the after-school for kindergarten. So that's $157,000 that we do for that. I know that has periodically been a question that's been asked.
One time we did an analysis on that, and it was over 200,000.
Yes, just come down a little bit.
Okay.
Does this include maintenance of the field?
Of the fields, yes. You have to remember that we do not maintain the fields the way that we did 5 years ago. We don't have as much staff, so we're not spending as much time on maintaining the fields that we did. We're not striping them as well. We're not doing the striping. We're getting a little bit more of the volunteer assistance on some of that type of stuff.
Just two other things I kind of noticed. I'm sure there are explanations for all this, but I noticed that there are some funds that it seemed as if they are really relics of the past. And then there's been new funds that have been opened, but we still keep the old fund. And I'm sure there are reasons for it, but like, for instance, I think there are 3 different funds for Opus. And so I'm wondering, so why do we keep all of those funds? Is there some reason why we have to keep all 3 of them? It just seems to me that we have a lot of funds, which makes the budget very complex. And maybe there might be some way to consolidate some of them, but maybe there are legal and historical reasons why you can't. But anyway, that was just a question. You don't need to go into much detail tonight, because I just noticed when I was going through.
I mean, those are trust funds. They were in trust for particular purposes.
Right.
And it would be, we would have to work with Opus to redo how we're accounting for their stuff. But yes, we need to look at that. We could look at that.
Okay. So that's kind of an observation as to how to get rid of the long list of funds and the complexity of them. Maybe some of them can be consolidated was observation. The other thing is just that there are some things that are still left over from the past, like the marine and the recreation haven't been fully separated out yet. In a lot of ways, the funding reporting is set up, and so I guess that's something we need to work on some more.
Yeah, from a annual basis, it has. From a historic basis, you're right, it hasn't. The reason was that's how we reported in the past, and just to try and maintain consistency. 5 years from now, all that will seem as if it never happened in this report. But it was just trying to maintain that consistency of how, so that way when somebody picked up an old budget and they picked up the new budget, they wouldn't be as confused. So it's just that question. But you're right, the historic information is still combined.
Lori?
Sure, I have a question. So in looking at the deferred projects, I'm wondering how did you determine which projects needed to get done? You said some citizens had, as to the community center, based on citizen complaints or feedback, we knew about some of those things, and I assume that there were inspections done on other facilities. But one facility which I noticed that's not in here is the tot lot, and I know a number of parents have mentioned to me that there's parts of the tot lot playground that have been in disrepair and have, the ride-on toys have been taken out and out of service and not replaced. And I'm wondering, how is it that items get on this list to begin with?
Well, there's really a variety of ways. So obviously, a lot of these requests come up from staff who's responsible for different areas, buildings, parks, things of that nature. Some of it comes, frankly, from citizens that may come forward at a city council meeting, or through maybe the Parks and Rec Commission. They may make a request through there. In the case of the tot lot, that was I was indicating that we have this kind of lengthy budget process, and then we have the kind of the real time of when things happen. And so there may very well be that the council wants to put some placeholder in there during this process to address that. That's an item that's going to have to come back and work its way through our kind of internal processes, probably with the council subcommittee, and then ultimately to the council if we're going to do some repairs there. But it just wasn't timely to the budget development process.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the reasons the subcommittee really talked about putting that $100,000 reserve for future projects. Mm-hmm. So those things that do come up, as Clay said, we start this process in January. I'd like to try and get most of it finished in March, as far as like the basic ideas of salaries, benefits, most of the expenditures, most of the revenues projected. So as things start hitting after that, we still include as much as we can. But I think that was a smart move on the subcommittee to put that 100,000 to say, if we need to put 20 or 30,000 into the tot lot, and the question with the tot lot becomes, do we go through a design process like we did for the community park? Because if you start changing the way the sand looks, you start making more as you start adding elements, you start needing to look at ADA accessibility, and that has a much bigger project than just saying, okay, let's add this element. I think that's also part of what, as Clay said, we need to figure out what the process is to make that change.
Okay, thank you. And then the skateboard project, will be coming before us, and there's a whole process laid out for that. Have any funds been set aside for that?
There's not specifically anything set aside in this budget for it, but we do have a little bit of money set aside for the design. And what I was anticipating was that we would wait until we knew what the project was, what the city council was comfortable with having fundraising from the community, similar to what we did with the community park, and then say, okay, based on that, here's how much money we need, and then how are we going to pay for that? So look at, wait till we really know what the cost of it is before we, say, okay, here's what we're going to set aside for it.
So did you say that funds were set aside for the design?
There is funds set aside in the recreational facility fund for the design.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Stuart. I had a couple questions on the payroll allocation chart, and it's on page 53, 54. Not to delve into it much, but is this what we currently staff, or is this positions available?
These are the projected positions for next fiscal year. So these are with the additions of what we've put into the budget.
There's a couple that kind of really jump out at me significantly. A couple of the police officers, right? So we have really only one new police officer. Two. We have two, and those are lower rated ones.
Those are the lower salaried ones.
And is this projecting that also two more that we're going to hire?
Yeah. So I actually budget at E-step for people because I never know exactly where they're going to come in. So that's one of the reasons we always have salary savings. The other one is that for new positions this year, we're going to learn from history and know we're not actually going to hire people July 1st. So new positions we've put in starting October 1st. So if you look halfway down through the officers, you'll see a couple of them are lower,
right,
at 69.76. And part of that is based on assuming one person gets this kind of extra pay for their education. This person doesn't have that. I mean, it's trying to make the best guess is what we're going to get.
But they also have step pay.
Yes, they do.
And it just seems to me that the step's not really there, almost in a sense. And that's I'm just kind of just kind of looking at that those steps aren't there. It's like poop.
Right. I mean, it's and you're correct. I budgeted E step. There will be some savings from people coming in at A or B step.
Yeah, and I also noticed that we do have one or two new firefighters, and that's the same case also. So, and one other thing is the harbor master seems to the salary has jumped significantly, and I'm talking like $30,000 significantly. Is that?
We'll have to look at that. I'm thinking this is the harbor now.
I mean, that hasn't happened. So
right.
Where are you looking at?
On page 54, halfway, about 2/3 of the way down.
These are just things that just kind of like jump.
I think that would be E-step for the harbor master. I'd have to go back and look at it. Because before we had the Marine Aquatic Services person, I thought that was higher.
Right, and they didn't even make that much. So it was like,
I think he made more than that. But okay, let me go look at that one.
Yeah.
There might be some savings there.
Well, yeah, and that's something that, I know for a fact that some of the other harbors around here don't even pay anywhere near close to that. And it's like, why would we do that?
And that's not what was in our.
That's not one, right.
In our hiring package
Okay.
for that salary position either.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just, just maybe recheck those numbers,
Yep.
I guess is a better way.
Yes.
Okay, anyway, I look forward to hearing from the departments, and I guess if we don't have any other questions, that moves us to the, you have a question? Yeah.
Wake me up again.
I just have a question about the dredging for Sierra Point. My understanding from doing a little bit of research is after we decide we budget for the dredging, my understanding is that there's only so much dredging that's allowed. And so once we make an application, it can take 2 to 3 years before we can actually dredge. And I just wanted to bring that up. I've been thinking that I don't know if we know that or if it's been looked at. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you have to apply for permits, I think, with the BCDC and have where all the spoils are going to go and everything like that. I guess Randy Bro would probably be the better one to answer that, Clay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work out this time, but I think it took us a couple years the last time we did this.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, so,
I think it took about 2 years once we started the process before we could actually do the dredging.
oh yeah,
Last time.
the last time I think the permit process will go a little bit faster this time for us because I think we know a lot more about it. But yeah, the last time the permit process I think probably was closer to 3 years.
and that was the first time that we dredged the harbor.
Right, that was the first
Right.
time we'd ever gone
Right.
through
So
that.
you need to find out what the spoils were and do all the analysis and stuff.
Right.
And you came in between.
Right, it was already started when I got here, and I think it was a couple of years after I got here before we actually had the permits.
Yeah.
Well, I know from talking with a lot of the boaters that right now it's not even a matter of getting in and out of the harbor that they're having a problem with. A lot of the boats are sitting on their keels at low tide, and that's going to become a problem pretty quickly if we don't get a move on doing the dredging and getting that working out, because they can't be just sitting there on their bottoms at tides.
Yeah, the
It's one
permit,
thing if they have to check tides to go in and out, but they're having difficulties with just sitting there.
right.
And these are people even without really deep keels, so it is becoming a pretty hot topic there at the marina for the actual boaters, and, is going to be a loss of revenue if we don't get a move on that.
Yeah, I know the permit application process is underway.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, because I'd like to be able to reassure people when I get those.
And I'll get you some more detail on that.
Perfect.
All of you.
You're racking your ear.
Oh, all weekend long.
Goes with the territory, Terry.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so with that, we have a departmental budget presentation, and the only one we have tonight is the city clerk's budget. So, Sherry.
And what page do you start on?
60.
Thank you.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, I present the city clerk's budget tonight, and essentially the numbers are not that, there haven't been any significant changes in the program, services, and supplies, but I thought that I'd do a breakdown of the time that I spent and where I do the different types of functions that my office is responsible for. So on the slide, hopefully before you, you'll see elections at the top, which is approximately 10% of my time and includes the nomination process, ballot measures, and working with the county elections officials every other year when we have an election, and sometimes on off years when we have a ballot measure that's placed on the ballot, either by the citizens or the council. Local legislation would include things such as public hearing notices, legal notices that I have to publish and post, contracts and agreements that are processed, the bonds and insurance documents that go with all of those, the ordinances and resolutions that the council passes, and the municipal code updates that are done every 6 months. Under the category of municipal officer, which I think is another approximately 15% of my time, that would include city council meetings and agendas and minutes for those meetings. Under the political reform filing officer, you're all well aware of the need to file your statement of economic interest, as well as all the department heads and contract employees. So that takes a significant amount of time to gather those documents each year and file them with the state, as well as the campaign finance forms that are done with all the elections that happen. So records and archives I have is about 10% of my time. That includes public records requests, indexing and research and retrieval of documents for both staff and members of and citizens, records filing and retention, and then historical information and logs that I keep so that I can quickly pull up information that people need. So public inquiries I have is about 10%, although it feels like a lot more. Phone calls that I get from members of the public, people coming in. I spend a significant part of my day helping people, which I enjoy, and notary services to citizens as well. So under City Council support services, that would be ceremonial functions, proclamations and commendations, commission and committee recruitments, and clerical help and research for council members. Affordable housing is something that I took over part of what Fred used to do, and it was affordable housing and redevelopment, and obviously that part got eliminated. But there are still first-time home buyer loans that we have out there, several of which had to be refinanced in the last year or two. And that took a significant amount of time. Senior housing inquiries about the availability of our senior housing building, and also some annual reports and budgeting that has to be overseen. And then, meetings and conferences about ideas for new projects or new affordable housing ideas. We also have some below market rate units at number 1 San Bruno, one of which had to be refinanced. So I do spend a significant amount of time in that area. And then Oversight Board and Successor Agency, that was a big chunk of time setting up all that whole new function, new meetings, agendas, minutes, and resolutions, and filing things with the state and the county. So that pretty much sums up what I do. And I guess I didn't put claims on here, which also is another portion of my time that I spend during the day. So with that, if you have any questions regarding my budget or what I do, I'd be happy to answer them.
Council questions?
Just one quick, presuming Prop 42 passes tomorrow, since there's no formal opposition to it, likely will, do you see that having much impact on the city?
On the oversight?
No, Prop 42.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I should be familiar with that, and I'm not. So,
no, so we already do a lot of the things for the open meeting law anyway. I mean, we haven't. So, my understanding of Prop 42 is it deals with the open meeting law and making it so it's not state reimbursed. We've already followed the
open meeting.
I thought it was like 42.
Records.
The
Reimbursement for records.
Right.
For records.
We're
Okay.
calling it the same thing.
Right, because I thought that was the state.
The issue is that, as I understand it, that it does reiterate, seems to me, the requirement that cities make available records to the public when requested. But the only thing that, as far as I can tell, that really changes is that it was considered a state mandate.
Right.
And so there was a state reimbursement.
oh, right.
Which they never really pay us.
And now they're saying, no, nothing's going to come from the state anymore. Cities have to take care of all of that from their own budget. And so that's why I was asking the question.
Yeah, I don't
is
see
that
that
gonna
having
impact us very much?
No, because we would comply just voluntarily with that.
I was thinking of
spirit, anyway.
Financially,
Yeah, I mean,
have much of an effect.
right? They've never paid.
The state has never paid anyway.
Yeah, the state. I mean, that's why they, I think, 2 years ago decided to rescind, to not mandate it. It was because they weren't paying on it anyway, and we were still following, the Brown Act issues, and providing public records in the same way that we did when it was mandated. So there really hasn't been a change to the way we've functioned, and I never budget for a state reimbursement because I don't trust them to actually reimburse us for what they're legally required to. It's found money when they do.
So their claim of millions and millions of savings.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be like if I came to you and you told me you were going, I gave you $1,000 and you told me you were going to pay me back and you never did. And then all of a sudden you said, I'm not going to pay you back. And you then say you saved $1,000. I mean, that's the analogy. They told us they're going to pay us. They never pay us. And now that they're saying, I'm never going to pay you, they say, oh, look how much money we saved.
So it was sort of like a written off account receivable.
Yeah, it was
like a whole bunch of money to legislate this when they're really not paying?
Well, I think that there have been lawsuits over the years, and I think that's probably in part what they're trying to clear up so that it just becomes clear that there's no mandates anymore. The whole issue of state mandates has been a complete fiasco for decades now, and just the state just simply doesn't pay.
Periodically we'll get a check from them, but it's not something we would ever budget for. Yeah, I mean, okay. Yeah, Betsy says usually the last check we may have gotten was like 2003, 2004 mandates. I mean, it's just not.
It took so much time for record keeping also because we had to
we would
track every single thing we did, and by the time you did all that, it felt like, what did we get for all that time that we had?
Spending more money than what you're saving.
Right.
Good to be king. That's what the state says. Till the federal comes down on them.
You have to get mad when the federal government does it.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have just one other. If no one
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Great.
So, how much help do you get from others on the staff? When things get pretty overwhelming, how does that work? Because you have a person who's designated as a deputy city clerk, so I assume that person spends part of her time helping you. So, how does that all work?
Well, I feel like I can't say there's a certain percentage of time. I just know when I need help, everybody is, chips in and gets the work done whenever any of us get backlogged. The halftime position that we're increasing might help Wendy so that she does have more time to backfill when something gets busy. She's pretty her own position is she took over the responsibilities for the reception area when we got rid of that position, which was the phones and the mail and the copy room and all of that. So she took that on fine, and then she got busy with all the publications and the arts programs, and she does all of that so well. And then it seems like there was an increase in council subcommittee meetings. Just there's that part, and we wanted her to have the time to focus on scheduling those without.
Clay's laughing when you said it seemed like there was an increase.
So she doesn't really have a lot of time to help me per se, but if ever I need it, she's there. And maybe now that we have that halftime position and she's handing off some of the arts programs and garden and things like that, she can focus more on Clay's calendar and the subcommittee meetings, and then help backfill me when I'm gone or it gets busy. So that'll be really nice to have. I mean, I think more mistakes happen when people are just rushing too much, and I see that she's been doing too much. And it'd be nice to be able to slow down and concentrate on some of the details.
So on the salaries, on your budget, this is for yours.
That's all you had, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is the salaries, and then there's an additional amount that is of your portion goes to the oversight board and is on the successor agency.
Yeah, 20% of the salary is on the oversight board.
And so, okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Is it? Cliff, you have anything?
I do not.
Lori? Thank you, Sherry.
Welcome.
Oh.
I was going to make one last comment. So,
Oh, okay.
based on the
Really want to stretch this out? We're talking about the.
Well, I was hoping to get done by 9:30. Just to let you know that the budget subcommittee suggested that we spend a lot more time talking about what the different departments do. So what you're going to see for all the departments is a chart like this that talks about all the functions that they perform, and then we will go through if there's any new changes to their budget, what their one-time expenditures are, so you can spend time with that. If there's new positions, if there's new expenditures that were not in last year's budget, we'll pull those out for the city council for the presentation for the council. As Sherry said, there was nothing new in her budget, which is why there aren't any additional slides about numbers.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is it? Like,
I wanted to, if we're going to do this no, you don't need to get up. This is more of a graphics thing, since I did not do well in geometry. These all look like the same size of pie. So if you could put the percentages there, because Sherry mentioned on about half of them what her percentages were, but not on the other half. So if they came on the next department slide.
The challenge with that is that different departments really have a hard time breaking out by percentage because their workload is very transient at times. I mean, if you were to ask, for instance, the finance department, how much time do we spend on utility billing versus payroll versus accounts payable versus cash receipts? I mean, we have and you'll see there is a number of things that we do. Hard to say what percentage of time on any given one of those, because there's people dedicated and portions of people, and then there's backup. So some of them doesn't have that same percentage as a one-person shop does, like she is.
I understand that, but on the pie, you have to put in something to make your pie.
Yeah, a lot of them are actually just the same number to make all the slices the same. But the departments that have given it to me, I will do that. Because, like, the police patrol has different percentages for nighttime and than they do for daytime. And those I can do. So where I can, I will do that.
I'm just meaning that if you have a pie chart, it...
Yep, I understand. I will do it for those that make the most sense.
Because on this one, elections and public inquiries look very different size, and they were both 10%. And to me, from what she said...
Right.
And to me, they look like way different sizes of pie.
it's like 12 and 9.
Nope, I understand. So I'll do that.
And that's just because I am challenged in that respect. So thank you.
Okay, anything else? Take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
To our next budget meeting, which is
June 9th, Monday. No.
from tonight.
A week.
Yeah, it's a week from tonight. And then also the 11th. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned.
Nothing going on tomorrow.
Pardon?
Nothing.